Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a review of Tarzan the Warrior from Malibu Comics. This is a retro review from Malibu's first Tarzan series in the 90s, and I've already done an overview of the whole run that they did, and I did have a comment that reminded me that Semic International actually produced the comics and Malibu published them over here. Unfortunately, YouTube ate that person's comment and they had a suggestion for an article I could read for more information about this run of Tarzan comics. So if you can repost that comment, I'd appreciate it. Maybe it'll make it through the filters this time. YouTube is strange. But anyway, let's get going here. So this is not the cover of the first issue. This is actually the back cover. This is just a little bonus that they throw in there, but I like it. I like Simon Beasley. Now, it's a strange cover, but, you know, some people might say that the apes are strange. I don't have a problem with that. There were intelligent apes in the Burroughs novel. The thing that draws my eye is, what is Jane doing with red hair? She's a blonde, but it's all right. Artistic license is a wonderful thing. It's a great back cover. I love it. So anyway, actually, before I get to the covers, let me show you some of the work of the interior artist. This is I guess a promotional piece done by Neil Vokes. And I love this image. This is a really well-rendered, strong, interesting image. And to be honest with you, I prefer it over any of the covers that we got. So here's the first cover, and I didn't pick this miniseries up back in the day, but I still remember to this day seeing this in magazines and solicitations and stuff. And it is a very eye-catching image that is memorable. However, I don't necessarily find it all that pleasant to look at. And like, what's up with Tarzan's hair? This just doesn't look like human hair. And most of the other covers I thought were just okay. There's just more interesting stuff in the interior. These are by Mark Hempel, who inks the first 3 issues. And some of this stuff is just mystifying, like, why is Jane naked here? She is not naked in the issue. So my theory is they probably had these drawn when they were conceiving of the series, but, you know, when the final scripts were done, you know, they were different. But I will say I do really like this last cover. I think this one nailed it. I think this is a seller to me. Tarzan in full of rage, yelling at the reader. This is the last thing many villains see before they die. And so I really like the interior art. I think the line work is great. I think the storytelling is fantastic, and the coloring is just great. It's just a really, really nice looking comic. It's just really beautiful. And, you know, that's the advantage of being an indie comic, is that they honestly, a lot of companies back in the day that were small press had better printing and coloring processing than DC and Marvel did back then. And so the story is by Mark Wheatley, and in my opinion, this is probably the best written Tarzan story as far as the dialogue and the internal monologues go that I've read. I know that this is set in the present, so there is a bit of more gravitas, you know, for this. You know, this is kind of the final fate of Tarzan and Jane, but just the way these two characters are written just immediately grabs me and makes me identify with them and sympathize with them in a way I just normally don't. And it's just really wonderful. These are two characters who are very different from each other, but they fiercely love each other. And that's what marriage is. I mean, it just really nails it. And this is my absolute favorite rendition of Jane. And I love Tarzan too. I mean, and this is the Burroughs doodad. They made that into the scar for the Malibu Comics run of Tarzan, which is pretty cool. And this is such a great opening scene. They find this Mangami, which is the species of great ape that raised Tarzan, that's been hit by a car, and it turns into this kind of action scene where they're chased by the cops. And, you know, it's just really engaging stuff. I'm just loving it. And then an alien crash lands. Isn't that always the way it is in comics? And not that there's anything wrong with the scene, it's beautifully rendered, the alien is beautifully designed and well thought out. The action is well choreographed and flows and is just really cool. But it is a big shift in the story that the reader has to kind of figure out why this is happening. It does establish that Tarzan visited the lost cities in the novels through dimensional portals, but obviously there are easier ways to explain that than having an alien crash land. But we start kind of understanding it when we end up in what they call the lost city of Baltimore in this post-apocalyptic future. But it's when he passes through another portal and ends up on an alien planet that the miniseries really gets amazing. And so he meets this alien race of Mangami refugees, and he befriends them and becomes very deeply involved in them. And it's just really absolutely nails the feeling you had in those old novels when Tarzan would go to these new civilizations that he would find and, befriend the people there and get involved in their conflicts and their politics. And it's just done so well. Issue 3 is just an amazing issue. And so I had zero problem with the aliens or the other dimensions. I think they worked super well. My problem, ironically, is the subplot on Earth with the humans. So there's a subplot that runs through here where this old guy is kidnapped by this evil dude who claims that this dude is Tarzan. And we'll notice that the villain also looks a lot like Tarzan. So my problem with this subplot is it's cryptic just for the sake of being cryptic. I mean, the only reason it's a mystery is because the characters don't explain themselves fully. And unfortunately, the writer, when he does the plot synopsises in the front of the issues, the recaps, he pretends like either of these characters could be Tarzan, which is just ridiculous. I mean, we've already met Tarzan. He seems like Tarzan. He's with Jane. Why would either of these two characters be Tarzan? But it created confusion, and it was just unnecessary. Now, I will say, though, that as long as you're not confused, this is actually really well written for what it is. He can't have these characters just come out and say who they are, but we still get a sense of it, throughout this subplot, and we do definitely feel for this old man. We're definitely rooting for him to escape, and we definitely do, kind of feel how demented this villain is. And I think most people can probably guess in general terms who they are in relationship to Tarzan, but it's the specifics that I think are very controversial and that I had an even bigger problem with. So I'm just going to say I recommend this miniseries. It's great except for this one subplot. And now I'm going to get into spoilers and tell you, who they are and why I had a problem with it. All right, so as you've probably guessed, these are descendants of Tarzan. So the old man is actually his grandson. The villain is actually his son. And so Tarzan's evil son is actually really epic. He actually runs Greystoke Enterprise or whatever it's called nowadays, and he has Tarzan's physical abilities, and they get in this really epic fight in the remains of a lost city in Africa that we've been to in the novels. It's really epic stuff. So I'm actually really liking the general concept of the character, but the problem is how he's Tarzan's son. So what they do is, in The Return of Tarzan, there was a countess at the beginning of the novel that Tarzan was accused of having an affair with. He denies this. The countess was married. Tarzan was not. This is before he married Jane. Jane was engaged to someone else at this point. But he denied it, and that was a major plot point in that novel. The premise of this evil son is that Tarzan did have this affair and did conceive a child with this woman, and then Tarzan denies that he could be his son. And the whole motivation for the villain is just to get Tarzan to acknowledge he could be Tarzan's son. I really don't like that. I mean, first of all, it's a really small, petty motivation for a villain who should be really big, right? Second of all, what it does to Tarzan's character. So, the premise here is that Burroughs in the novels is relaying the story of what he says is the real Tarzan, but he changes details to kind of protect people's privacy and stuff. But, you know, the premise that they use here is that Burroughs also changed little details in order to, you know, maybe protect Tarzan's dignity here. But I don't like it. I think the idea, and this was super common in the 90s, and I hated it almost every time they did it, was that in order to make the character seem human, you need to make the character flawed. And so affairs were sometimes used for that. And I got to tell you, it doesn't work. Tarzan was human when I saw him care about the Mangami and care about those alien apes they met on that other planet and love his wife. Those things made him identifiable and human to me. What they do at the end with the long lost son totally takes me out of that experience. All of a sudden, he goes from being this human, identifiable character to a 90s cliche. That being said, it is a minor flaw in an otherwise great miniseries. I think everything else in here overpowers that flaw. And honestly, I really like the idea of immortal Tarzan having an evil son. I just wish Jane had been his mother. I mean, you could imagine, like, if they did a Tarzan streaming series, they could tease a villain like that, and then when they reveal it's the evil son, they do an entire episode looking back at, you know, how he became estranged from his parents and how he became corrupted and turned to the dark side and all this stuff. So I think there's a lot of really, really cool ideas in here. I think the Malibu stuff is really a blueprint of how you could do Tarzan in a modern day setting, you know, in other media, whether it's TV or movies, or I guess now streaming. Is that a separate thing from TV? I'm not sure. But I think, you know, you could easily see, you know, this stuff on the screen. And this miniseries was actually controversial at the time, or at least according to the letters in the letter column. Personally, I don't have a problem with almost everything in here other than that subplot. But let me address some of that. So why have Tarzan and Jane in modern day times with modern day science fiction tropes? So in the novels, Burroughs did give Tarzan immortality and had Tarzan and Jane discover the secret to immortality. So, duh. And they made the argument in one editorial that Burroughs wrote most of the Tarzan novels in the present day. Whenever he was alive and he was writing it, that's when that novel happened. The only reason most Tarzan comics are set in the past now is because Burroughs died and they want to kind of preserve that era that Tarzan was in. But if Burroughs was alive, and you know, if he found the secret of immortality himself and he was still writing Tarzan, most likely Tarzan would be set in the present. Most likely Burroughs would have adapted. Most likely he would have been put in modern storytelling and modern science fiction tropes and modern issues in there, and we would have ended up with something like this. And it's not an unheard of thing to do with the character. If you read the comic strips, they very much appear to be in the present day, at least the ones that I've read. And it opens up a lot of storytelling possibilities because instead of having this character that's locked in the first half of the 20th century, you've got a character that you can set stories in the present or any time in the last 100 and so many years. So that's a lot of great territory, and it makes it a very versatile property. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Tarzan the Warrior, 5-issue miniseries from Malibu. The issues aren't that expensive, so you can hunt them down online and get them pretty easy. And up next, we'll be looking at the next miniseries that Malibu put out of Tarzan, and that is Tarzan, Love, Lies, and the Lost City. And yeah, as you can tell, him and Law, they got some issues. So like and subscribe for more videos, and until next time, see ya.